In 2122, the USCSS Nostromo was on a routine transport run, hauling a large Cygnus Tessitec 2100B ore refinery from Thaddeus back to Earth when it picked up a signal of unknown origin in the Zeta Reticuli system. In order to investigate the signal, the ship's AI mainframe roused the crew from hypersleep. Some of them were unhappy with this, but they had no real say in the matter as they were contractually obligated to check out possible intelligent life. Commissioned in 2101 by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, the long-haul transport craft USCSS Nostromo was a CM-88B Bison series star freighter. However, it wasn't long before the company refit it to function as a commercial towing vessel. In order to move the massive refineries the vessel was intended to tow, the side-mounted Saturn J3000 engines were replaced with significantly more powerful Rolls-Royce N66 Cyclone thrust tunnels. Each of these engines produced 64.9 giganewtons of thrust and used water as the reaction mass. When docked, their output was directed down propulsion expansion ports on whatever the ship was hauling. There were also a number of ancillary thrusters on board, such as the nacelle-mounted VTOL thruster ports for surface landings, as well as secondary maneuvering engines on the Nostromo's rear and up on the docking module. This docking module was how the Nostromo connected with its cargo, providing both a secure attachment point and control interface, allowing some basic commands to be issued to the refinery. For faster-than-light travel, the vessel used a Yutani T7A NLS tachyon shunt drive, capable of propelling the ship at a cruising speed of 0.42 light-years per day when unladen. This dropped to 0.1 to 0.12 light-years per day when a refinery was being hauled. For communications, the vessel carried a pair of hyperstate antennas, as well as standard radio frequency systems for video and audio links over shorter distances. Alongside these antennas was a comprehensive sensor suite, consisting of telescopes for optical, spectrographic and infrared imagery, a gas chromatograph, multiple radars for navigation, ground mapping and landing, as well as a mass counter for supralight navigation. Despite the huge size of the craft, the massive reactor and engines took up much of the internal volume. This meant that the habitable section, made up of 3 pressurized decks, was only in the ship's head and neck. The smallest of these was A deck, the main location of the crew facilities, and as such was the most comfortable area. The most important location on A deck was the bridge, densely packed with well-worn crew stations, emergency equipment, and the general mess that long-term human habitation brought to a place. It was also one of the few places on board with a view to the outside world. Just off the bridge was the interface chamber for the ship's onboard computer, the MUTHUR 6000 AI mainframe. Mother, as the crew referred to it, controlled all of the Nostromo's background systems, as well as providing the crew with company directives and oversight. In the event of computer failure, there was a second backup mainframe, as well as a third level of system automation to maintain the ship's autonomic functions. While humans were needed for the complicated docking procedures at either end of the journey, the AI was required to pilot the ship while the crew slept. They did that in hypersleep capsules that placed their occupants into a slow-wave sleep state, whilst halting the aging process by limiting cell replacement. The final room on A deck was the spacious infirmary, kept in absolutely spotless condition behind a double door. This held only a single central bed, as well as various biological analysis tools, including an auto-dock scanning compartment. Below A deck were the much more expansive B and C decks. These primarily held various storage lockers, workrooms, holds for miscellaneous cargo, as well as a crew lift and airlock. These cargo holds also doubled up as garages for a number of ground support vehicles. A large amount of these 2 decks was taken up by the forward landing gear bay, and there was also a small observation station with EVA suit video links for monitoring crew who were outside. Connecting all these together was a warren of dimly lit corridors, companionways, ladder shafts and air ducts, with walls covered in grates, pipes and grimy equipment access panels. This, along with the increased temperature, made the lower decks a fairly unpleasant environment to work in, a fact that the Nostromo's engineers, Dennis Parker and Samuel Brett, played up when other crew members ventured down into their domain. The enormous Laratel WF-15 2.8 terawatt fusion reactor took up the majority of the rear of the ship, and was accessible from the lower decks. This reactor had an elaborate cooling system that could be manually shut down in order to scuttle the ship, though there was a 5-minute grace period during which the cooling could be safely restarted. If not restarted, the reactor would detonate after another 5 minutes, taking the ship and its cargo with it. There were 2 light shuttles mounted to the Nostromo's underside, tucked between the engine nacelles and the main hull, for the crew to use for light planetary excursions or as lifeboats. They were far from the rest of the habitable section of the ship and were only accessible through a single companionway. Despite regulations requiring both shuttles to be functional, only the Narcissus was in a flyable state. The 2 shuttles were modified Lockmart Star Cub class inter-system craft with a greatly extended range. These were added to the Nostromo as part of its 2116 refit, alongside an update to the shuttle launch bays. While docked, the rear of the shuttle was protected by a retractable shield until the craft was ready to launch, at which point the port and starboard docking clamps were disengaged and the shuttle was released from the Nostromo. The cabin had a single access point at the aft of the vessel and held seating for 3, a pilot, co-pilot and scientist, as well as EVA suits, tools and other equipment they would need for planetary surface excursions. For longer journeys, there were 2 hypersleep capsules in the centre of the cabin, and a third could be fashioned from a convertible locker on the starboard side. For faster-than-light interstellar travel, the shuttle had a Romberg 100C tachyon shunt drive. As this drive was so small, it could only manage relatively low supralight speeds, but with a full fuel load, it had a maximum range of 13 parsecs. For standard propulsion, the Shuttlecraft used its 9 GW microfusion reactor to power a pair of Newington A24 rocket motors. Like the craft's parent ship, they used water for reaction mass. These motors directed their thrust through either the 4 large aft nozzles or the 2 smaller nozzles on the shuttle's nose. Out of the Nostromo's 7-person crew complement, only Warrant Officer Ellen Ripley and the ship's cat Jonesy managed to escape before its reactor overloaded. Unfortunately for them, the Narcissus went unnoticed as it drifted through the core worlds, and they weren't recovered until 2179, 57 years later.